Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast.
Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast. This is Peter.
And this is Walker.
Who is in Washington, D.C. And I'm going down to Washington, D.C. And we're going to go and see Turandot together. I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. Can't wait.
So it's a new production of Turandot, and I'm going to say Turandot, not Turandot, which most people say Turandot, because I did a little research. I mean, I've always said Turandot, which is technically the wrong way because no one says it that way. But the story is that actually when it was being written, and it was actually, they used the word Turandot, Toscanini called it Turandot. And then after Puccini died, his children insisted that it was Turandot. So everyone did it. And I looked it up, Walker.
Mm-hmm.
There is, in the Ping Pang and Pong scene, look at the rhyming structure.
Right.
It is Turandot.
Right, yeah.
Because it has to rhyme with another O word.
Exactly. So that's the solution, yeah.
I'm sticking with
it. All right. The nerdiness is victorious.
Well, they're doing a production of Turandot at the Washington National Opera. It opens like right now, May 11th through the 25th, with director Francesca Zambello. And as you know, the end of Turandot was never finished because he died before he finished writing it. So Susan Soon He Stanton, who is a playwright and writes for television, she writes for Succession, though.
Succession.
Sorry, did I say Succession?
It's not a Civil War drama.
Yeah, I've never seen it because I can't afford HBO.
Oh, Peter!
It's not a Civil War drama.
No, it's not.
Hoop skirts.
No. Maybe that's what'll be next. Who knows? Maybe that's Christopher's next project. Who knows?
So she's the screenwriter, or one of the screenwriters for Succession, and the composer Christopher Tin has been asked to complete the opera, the unfinished portion. Now, do you know, or did you know of Christopher Tin before we had a chance to interview him?
I didn't. Yeah. And, apparently he has risen to fame through his music for video games, including Civilization 4. Is that right? So yes, I got it. Yeah, I'm about as distant from any type of video game as you are from Succession. But anyway, so yeah, apparently his piece has become a staple, like a concert staple around the world and competitions, and it's really like propelled him to much more fame. And then he's also done a bunch of film music also, right?
Yeah, and the way I heard from him is people have said, "Hey, have you heard this choral piece?" And I heard this Welo Yo Yamoni, which is, you can see it on YouTube. You've heard it. I'm sure you've heard it because it comes to my feed. And if you're a classic music geek like I am, I'm sure it's been fed to you.
Yeah.
So let's hit the basic background story behind Turandot, so that while we're talking about it with the composer Christopher Tin, that people won't be completely lost if they've never seen the opera. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell the story, or should I?
No, you're better at it. You do it.
Okay.
I'll just sit here and correct you if you do anything wrong.
I'm sure I will, actually.
Okay.
So Turandot starts. And basically, Turandot is a princess who is unmarried. And she doesn't want to get married. She seems to be a rather stern character, but we don't actually see her for the whole first act. They just sing about her. And suitors come and they go through a test And what happens is she asks them 3 questions. And if they get all 3 right, they can marry her. But if they get one wrong, they execute them. Yes.
Yes.
And so the opera starts actually with an execution of a suitor.
And that's where the other suitor falls in love.
Kalaf. So Kalaf is watching.
What a great moment.
And just, he's seeing this guy being killed and he falls in love with her. Because obviously, right?
Wow. What a hottie. Yeah,
what a hottie.
She's the praying mantis of princesses.
Yes.
Yes.
So, and she really doesn't want to get married. I mean, she clearly is not interested.
She has issues. Yeah. We don't know yet why. But she does not want to get married to anyone. Yeah.
And of course, Kalaf, signals his intention to answer the 3 questions. And there are these 3 ministers, Peng, Pang, and Pong. Oh my God, those names. Ping, Pang, and Pong try and stop him from doing it. So you don't want to do this. And he decides he's going to go through with it anyway. So that's Act 1. Act 2 is him actually going through the questions. Mm-hmm. And he, of course, answers all 3 of the questions. And she is really upset by this. And he sees this. And so Kalaf says, well, I'll ask you a question. And if you get it right, you can behead me.
Well, she can make a choice. Yeah.
Well, I think he says, I'll die. If you get it right, I will die.
All right. If you so desire, if you haven't fallen in love with me yet.
Yeah, in the morning.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And she very clearly says she's not interested.
Right. Pretty clearly. Yeah.
And she rages and she starts questioning all the people to find out what his name is. And that's the beginning of Act 3. Apparently she sends people out to ask everyone in the country, who is this man? Of course, that is at the point where Kalaf sings the famous Nessun Dorma, which means nobody's sleeping, or no one sleeps. Is that the best way? I don't know what the best translation of that is. Nessun Dorma. Now, the other part of this is his father, who is a disgraced king as well, is actually there in the country incognito with a slave girl named Liu. And of course, Liu lays one look at Kalaf and she's in love with him.
Wait, but why doesn't she know him from earlier?
No.
Why is she seeing Kalaf for the first time? He's the son of the king.
Well, no, but they were exiled.
Okay, they were exiled long ago.
He's been helping her.
Okay.
And I think the king has been telling her stories about him. So maybe her love of him is a little more justified than Kalaf.
Okay. Yes, probably. Yeah.
Who wants the murderous, So Liu knows, and of course he sings Nessun Dorma, and the morning's over, and he then approaches Turandot to say, well, what is my name? And they figure out that there's someone who knows what his name is, and it's Liu, and they drag Liu out and threaten her. This is torture her, threaten her with torture.
No, they actually torture her. They're torturing her, right? And then he just stands aside. He lets this happen.
I think she decides that she would rather die than give up Kalaf's name, and she commits suicide. She grabs a knife and and of course at that point that Puccini finished orchestrating. After that, it's sort of a reconstruction from these sketchbooks and things like that. And there have been several reconstructions, and we'll talk about that with Christopher when he's on.
I think just, there was, then it became sort of a free-for-all. Who's going to finish this opera? Some people thought it couldn't be finished. and that Puccini, that it was good that he died, because he never recognized his failure in writing this opera that couldn't end, that couldn't be given the right ending. Then Alfano was given no, Puccini chose someone to
Yeah.
finish it. Then Puccini's son vetoed that and gave Alfano the job. Okay.
Right.
And that's the ending that we frequently see in performance, Alfano's ending. But then also the composer Berio did an ending, and now Christopher Tin. So
Well, there have been others.
there have been others. There have been others as well. Yeah, yeah.
All right, so we got a chance to talk with Christopher Tin, and we got to ask him how it feels to be asked to rewrite what is the ending of a major masterpiece.
I will say that I am blessed to be given this opportunity, and the world has existed for the last 100 years with the Alfano ending just fine. There are people who complain about it, but no opera's perfect and all that. That said, I'm tremendously grateful that there is already this tradition of trying to rewrite the ending prior to me jumping into this, because if somebody said to me, finish Mozart's Requiem or something, it isn't exactly like this well-trodden path of composers trying and failing before. With this, even the Alfano ending was harshly criticized upon initial reception, and all the others, including Berio's ending, have all sort of been somewhat accepted, but have also sort of engendered criticism as well for a variety of different reasons. So based on that, I felt like, okay, well, if I screw this up, I'm just another composer who screwed it up, and it's just fine, right? But that said, I had no intention of screwing this up. Like, I invested a lot of attention to this particular project.
So when you're rewriting this, are you rewriting this to address those issues, or was there something larger you wanted to address?
So there's the whole chinoiserie aspect of it that's very much in debate these days. And there was actually a really, really good New York Times article that came out maybe a couple of weeks ago talking about Butterfly and Turandot. And it was a good one, right? And I actually agreed with a lot of it. I mean, first of all, Puccini, in my opinion, as an Asian American, he did a pretty darn good job of incorporating Asian melodies into his score. He did his due diligence. Like, the more that I read about what he did, I mean, for a person in Italy in 1924, yeah, you're not going to have great access to authentic, or rather, a lot of musicology about, Asian music. Good for him for like doing the research, right? At least he tried. I mean, and I will say, if you know any of the rest of my music as well, I'd be a hypocrite if I said that one should not meld together music from different cultures. I think that music is one of these wonderful things that should transcend culture, and that we should share music. And similarly, on these cultural lines, yes, there are particular cultures that are sensitive to appropriation, and there's some that really don't care so much. I sort of think that Chinese culture in particular really does not care all that much. I sort of think that, I can't speak for all Chinese people out there, but it's sort of like when you see a person who's obviously not Chinese wearing a Chinese character, like a tattoo or something like that on their arm. None of us are offended by that. At worst, we're just like, all right, like, I hope you got the word right, I mean, like, you never know, right? I mean, the chinoiserie does not bother me at all. It was a product of its time, and frankly, a lot of great music came out of it. And you hear that in Turandot. A lot of great stuff. There are aspects of it, like Ping Pang and Pong, that are kind of annoying. And that's actually kind of maybe not so much of Puccini's fault. Maybe it was, but I mean, nowadays you say that to any Asian American person and they're just going to roll their eyes and say, oh, come on, like, are we like 8 years old again on a playground? Like, what is this, right? And there are actually sort of deeper elements of cultural representation through the musical tinta that Puccini used, where he sort of assigned a certain harmonic language to each of his characters that sort of imbued the characters with certain, I guess, like characteristics that once you delve into it, gets a little bit offensive. By the way, we need to acknowledge that the ending was masterminded by Susan Soon He Stanton, my collaborator on this. She's my librettist, first time opera librettist, same way that I'm a first time opera composer. And we had a really great collaboration on this project. Susan is well known for, amongst other things, being a playwright, but also as a television writer for the show Succession on HBO, which is super cool. It's a fantastic show too. And every once in a while I joke to her, "Hey, so we're doing an opera about Succession, right?" Like, but to get back to your question, the big problem that I saw was that nobody believes the way their love story wraps up in the original Alfano ending, and frankly, it's a little bit cringy post Me Too. I mean, I assume that everyone listening to this knows how it wraps up, but in case you don't, basically after 2.5 acts of them being at each other's throats and trying to conquer each other or kill each other or whatever, Kalof plants a big juicy kiss on Turandot without her permission, and suddenly you get the harps go and the flutes go, do 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 do, and suddenly she's like, "I'm in love with you." Wow. Right? And even by opera standards, that's pretty over the top, right? That is way too far. And frankly, kind of insulting and, kind of sexual assaulty, a little bit rapey, I felt like that just needed to be fixed. And I think Francesca Zambello, the artistic director of Washington National Opera, she's also, she really feels that Turandot as a Puccini heroine had so much unrealized potential in a way, like she loves to say that Puccini women are great characters, but Turandot herself is given this screwed up ending that makes no sense, and so we wanted to give her a real ending. I do know that what Susan came up with was entirely Susan's idea. Like when she suggested these little plot twists, we were all surprised and delighted in a way. And it's suddenly all like once you know what Susan did, it's hard to go back to thinking about the other way the plot unfolds itself. Like it's very clever, and not gimmicky. It actually makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I'm very thrilled with what she did.
So you've written a new ending. Have you also written any new arias in the opera?
Well, my ending is actually, it takes over where Puccini laid down his pen, according to Toscanini, right? And it's about 18 minutes long, depending on how Speranza, the conductor, is going to take certain passages. But Turandot herself has a new aria, one that is actually a bit of a throwback to In Questa Regia from the second act. Kalof has a new aria as well, which is also a throwback to Non piangere nu in the first act. Not so direct, but there is a reference to that. And this was deliberate. I wanted to sort of anchor some of the segments of what I did to draw a line between them and what Puccini did in a way, like anchor them to Puccini's score in harmonic ways or in, little motifs that are sort of quotations of previous moments. And then there's a big kiss scene. And then the chorus comes back on and we set the stage for Turandot's final address to the citizens of China. And then she reveals that she has chosen to rule with mercy, and that Kalof will not be beheaded. And the chorus sings about love again. But hopefully, in our new ending, you believe it when we get to the end, because it wasn't predicated by somebody just planting a wet one on Turandot.
So did you rewrite anything from earlier in the opera?
We pretty much left the original opera, Puccini section, intact as it is. I don't think you would actually go and see the Puccini portion and say, oh, something was changed to accommodate a new ending. Like we very much wanted our new ending to be like the final episode in a TV series or something like that. Going back to the TV analogy, right? It's its own contained unit that does reference the rest of the season, but makes sense on its own, and just had a better end for the show in a way.
So, did you base the music that you wrote on Puccini's sketches, or did you add new material to the writing?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm a composer, right? I mean I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna sit around just. Okay, yes, it's Puccini. Okay, yes. I mean, and I did try to use as much of both motifs from the earlier portion of the opera, his portion, and also some of the sketches that he left behind. But the sketches that he left behind don't actually correlate to the new libretto in any sort of way. So that became one of these questions like, how do you treat these? In a way, I sort of did what Barrio did. I sort of recontextualized them. Barrio's Mr. Postmodern, like everything gets thrown into this melismatic, or not melismatic, sort of soup of like thematic and harmonic material that just kind of overflows all over the place to dazzling results. I would take Puccini sketches that he had left behind for the end of the opera, some of which you hear in the Alfano ending, and I would use them in our new ending, but in ways that maybe created a conversation about aspects that were not okay about the Alfano ending. I'll give you an example. There is a moment in the Alfano ending where after Calaf kisses Turandot, he sings, "Oh mio fiore mattutino, il fiore da 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 da." Forget the Italian, but basically he's saying, "Oh my rare unfolding flower, thy bosom I am." Thy scent I am breathing, thy bosom that is heaving, or something like that. Something very like, by our standards now, kind of cringy as a thing that you would say to somebody that you just kissed, without permission, right? It's just a little gross. In our ending, I'll just tell you right now, what Susan came up with was that, how Turandot in the Puccini portion sings in Questa Regia, where she talks about her ancestress Lo Ling, who was attacked and forcibly assaulted and raped, presumably raped. So what Susan did, and this is super clever, is after a big confrontation scene between Calaf and Turandot. Now remember, after Lou gets taken off, these two are left alone on stage for the first time. This is the first time you see that few people on stage, two people on stage. It's the most intimate moment of the entire opera. And suddenly these two forces are left to duel it out together, right? So after a bit of a duel, which by the way is more, like more mutual now. Like in the Alfano ending, basically he let Calaf just scream at Turandot for a couple of minutes before kissing her, right? So in our ending, they actually go at it on equal terms as two adversaries, right? It's an epic duel. So after that, the end of that, what Turandot admits is that it was not Lo Ling who was raped. So now she reveals this in a moment of vulnerability, and that recasts everything, right? And so now she sings this song, this aria. And the aria that she sings is basically her reliving that experience. But then at the end of it, she goes into this more steely, like, I will overcome this mode. She tells the story, and then she says, but since then, like no man shall have me, like none shall defile me ever again, like I am powerful, and she, proclaims this, right? And it's a very powerful moment. But in the first portion where she's singing about what happened to her, I actually use another Puccini motif, Del Primo Pianto, which appears in some versions of the Cloth. I think there are versions out there where I believe they cut that moment, but that's a fragment that I use, and I bring it back in this new guise. And by doing so, you sort of create this commentary, right? Like Del Primo Pianto is about my first tears flowing, and how when she first laid eyes on Prince Kalof, she was so moved by his beauty that she started to cry, right? Well, okay, that's ridiculous. So now we've taken that same motif, and now it's about her first tears being actually a reference to this truly horrific moment that happened to her in her past that sort of defined her character.
So is the music that you've written, is it going to sound like Puccini, or is it going to sound like clearly Christopher Tin's music?
I think they'd recognize it as mine. I mean, I think the key is that on the contemporary classical composer spectrum, I am of the more sort of, academics might say, common practice side of things. Functional harmony, melodies. I'm a big melody guy. I love writing a good tune. Certain musical structures that are identifiable, that are sort of discrete and neatly packaged. So you know that there's here's this section, and here's a big chorus or a climax. I tend to write in very familiar ways to the modern audience. And part of that language comes from the fact that, I got into music and composing, following in the footsteps of a lot of great film composers who inherited this sort of Puccini tradition. So the way that I tackle music isn't so far removed from Puccini, such that if I write in my own natural voice, it's not really so foreign. In the same way that Luciano Berio might be. He is a incredible, incredible composer, but his music sounds nothing like Puccini. And frankly, Franco Alfano's music doesn't sound like Puccini either. He was already sort of heir to this sort of progressive modernist tradition coming out of Germany, maybe. Puccini was the last of this great line of grand opera composers. There are some scholars who say that Turandot is the closing opera of the grand Italian opera tradition. Franco Alfano wanted to take it a different way, and I think that's why his ending is a little bit sort of rejected by audiences, because it doesn't quite fit in. He wasn't into writing pretty melodies that sat in discrete sort of scenes that flowed one to the other. His was a language more sort of like Richard Strauss, Salome, something that's it's very sort of, the music is nested almost on a bar by bar measure with the words and the affect of what's going on, and it shifts a lot, and it's pretty dazzling on an orchestrational sort of standpoint. But what you're not delivering is sort of the audience satisfaction of, say, a stream of hit tunes one after the other, right?
To me, it sounds like Puccini is reaching for a more modern sound. Like there's whole sections to me that sound like Debussy.
But that's everything with him, right? I mean, like there are certainly passages in Turandot that are sort of baby Debussy in a way. I mean, and well, okay, you go back in an opera earlier, La Fanciulla del West, and that's very, very Debussy, right? And there are aspects of Turandot that are kind of Debussy, and there are aspects of Turandot that are a little bit, Rite of Spring. I mean, we were joking about, one particular section, and the accompaniment there is very Rite of Spring.
The part that sounds like Stravinsky to me are those chords at the beginning, those crunchy chords that start the act.
Okay, so the interesting thing about that chord, that crunchy chord, it's like I call it like a D flat major over a D minor. I think of it that way. You could also call it like like a minor major 7 with an added like a added sharp 11 or something. Anyway, but I actually use that harmony in my own aria that I wrote for her, because that's the same harmony that actually starts off all 3 acts. I mean, both two of the acts basically start with the the Mandarin singing, and he's singing over those chords, right? But also that exact same chord is in the intro to Act Two, prior to when the ministers come on as well. So, I mean, there are certain harmonic signposts that I used uh, in a way to anchor what I did with what Puccini did, and there's certain like melodic things that I do as well. I mean, I bring back some of the more recognizable motifs, like the axe motif, which is what starts off the opera. Da, 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 da. Bring that back, and I reharmonize it a couple of times to show sort of like the development of Princess Turandot. I do a big callback to Nessun Dorma, actually. And I do it in the moment that Calaf gives his name to Turandot. And the reason that I do that is because I wanted the audience to understand now that Calaf has changed. Because in order for Turandot to love Calaf, she needs to see that he's changed, right? So I took his most signature moment, which is Nessun Dorma. And that, by the way, is this moment where he's gloating about the fact that he's won. He's won. He's gloating. This is his victory lap, right? And he's just being a real rat bastard on stage. Even though it's the most beautiful thing you've ever heard, he's just kind of a jerk. And now I do a quick quotation of that in the big moment where Calaf, on his knees in our production, reveals to Turandot, "My name is Calaf." And by doing so, we signal to the audience, that now he's transformed. Now, instead of being this guy who thinks that love is this thing that you need to conquer, now he's a guy who believes that love is a thing that you need to be willing to give up your life for. And we do that musically.
So does the opera end with the chorus singing Nessun Dorma?
Well, actually, I think that's actually Puccini's idea to reprise Nessun Dorma. But I do this. I actually bring Nessun Dorma back at the end too. I do, and I'll tell you why. I believe in this silly idea called tradition. It's the preservation of fire, not the worship of ashes, right? As Mahler would say. And we've lived 100 years with a big Nessun Dorma finale at the end. And of course, it's a little out of the blue in the Alfano ending, because everything up until that moment doesn't make a ton of sense. But it is everyone's favorite part of the Alfano ending. And so I am not, because there are people who are going to come and say, like, this is weird because it's not what I'm used to. The very least I can give them is their favorite part of what they're used to. So in a way, like if you know music theory and if you know Schenkerian analysis, the whole point of your composition is to get to this big satisfactory 5-1 cadence at the end.
Yeah.
Right? So my 5-1 cadence, and by the way, I'm teasing this big perfect cadence all the way up to the very end, is we do a big sort of like moment where the soloists come together and they sing the signature line that Susan wrote for me, which is in this beautiful night, let us show the stars what it means to be free. So she gave me this line twice. It's introduced in Calaf's new aria, and it comes back, Turandot and Calaf singing as a duet right at the end. And this perfect authentic cadence that you've been waiting for all this time finally happens. And what do you resolve to? Boom, do, 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 do. There's the big payoff. But the thing is, because I quote Nessun Dorma before, I was very careful not to quote the exact same parts in both of my usages of it. So when you add the two together, they actually form the complete picture of Nessun Dorma. But the Nessun Dorma at the end excludes sort of the 8 bars or whatever it is that I sort of quoted before, and has different material that builds to a slightly different conclusion that also interweaves the big love motif after In Questa Regia. Dun, 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 dun. So I bring that all together because I like to take multiple musical ideas and mash them all together for a big explosive finale. And everyone sings about love, and hopefully this time you believe it.
So where are you currently in the rehearsal process?
Yeah, I saw the the staging last night for the first time, and I was just so moved. I mean, first of all, I was sitting there, I was like, I can't believe this is finally happening. I mean, Francesca first approached me about this pre-pandemic. And for a couple of years, I didn't know whether it was going to happen or not. But I kept hoping, because first time opera composer, this is not the usual sort of task that you're given. It's an interesting way to jump into the field, right? Okay, this is kind of a fun story. Um, she didn't know who I was, and I'd never written opera before, but it was on my bucket list. But one day, she was in her kitchen making lunch or something like that, and she heard this music coming from her son's bedroom, her teenage son's bedroom. So, and it's classical music. And she's like, "What is this? What's he doing?" So she goes up and she knocks on his door, and it turns out he's playing Civilization 6. And the theme that I wrote for Civilization 6 is sung in Italian. It's a choral piece. It sounds very classical, actually. Um, and she's like, I thought this was an opera. It sounds kind of like an opera, but I never heard it before. And so she asked him, what are you listening to? And he explained about my music. And then she went on this dive on YouTube and discovered more of my stuff. And then a few days later, my agent gets an email from her saying, hi, I'd like to talk to your client, Christopher Tin, about writing for opera. And so I flew up to San Francisco where she was staging The Ring. Um, and she was doing rehearsals, and so we had lunch and actually saw what she was doing, and I was just of course blown away. I mean, I love this world and I want to stay in it. And afterwards we went to lunch and she said, what do you want to write an opera about? I said, I don't know. No one's ever asked me this before, right? And to be honest, I'd always been a little hesitant too, because every composer that I've talked to about writing an opera says, oh, it's going to kick your butt. Like, it's going to take years out of your schedule and you're not going to be able to do anything else. And it's kind of a downer because, sometimes you can spend 2 years of your life writing this thing and it gets a run of performances and then it goes away forever. And how demoralizing is that, right? But to get back to the story, Francesca and I bounced some ideas back and forth about things we wanted to do. And one of her ideas was that she'd always wanted to sort of commission a new ending to Turandot. And the moment she said that, I said, oh, yes, that's what I want to do, because it's only 18 minutes long, right? So it's not going to take 2 years of my life. And I get to write for one of the largest operatic sort of casts and instrumental ensembles in the canon, right? It's enormous. And there's a huge choir, and I love writing choral music. There's a children's choir, there's an offstage band, there's all this exotic percussion, it's a big orchestra, soloists who are just tremendous singers, right? I mean, what a great gig this is for a first-time opera composer. It's not the usual you write a chamber opera for 5 singers and maybe 8 players or whatever. It's huge. So
So you seem to really love writing in foreign languages. Can you tell us a little bit about why you love that so much?
so the language thing is actually less about language, even though I do get sort of excited by this idea of broadening sort of the language base of choral music. It's more to do with what that particular piece is about. If it's a text from a particular culture, I'd rather do it in that culture's language in a way. Or if what I'm trying to do is sort of, one of these sort of multilingual concept song cycles where you sort of pluck text out of the literary traditions of different cultures and you put them together so that they create this meaning collectively. You try to find the singers and the language that matches that text, and I try to do it in a very authentic way as well, and I try to do it through collaboration most of the time too. Um, but that said, I do get a little bit bored by the standard languages as well too, especially in sort of choral music. I've written some in Latin, for example. But I find that uh, there's this disassociation with the words when the singers are singing in a language that they don't actually speak, like Latin. So this is an idea that I was sort of turning over in my mind, right? On one hand, you can have a chorister singing Kyrie over and over again for, a 4-minute piece or something like that. But how much are they invested in what the words mean at that point? Do they even know what Kyrie means? On the other hand, you can have a stadium full of football fans, soccer fans, football fans, and they might be singing, we will rock you. Each one of those singers has a much more deep emotional investment in the actual words that they're saying right now. They're doing it collectively as a group. They're all singing the same thing. They're making a tremendous sound and they're cheering on their home team or whatever it is. And the association that those singers, the passion that those singers put into those words is different in a way. And this is something that's kind of interesting to me these days. Like I like, for example, gospel music. I think that gospel choirs, when they're singing praise the Lord or something like that, there is a much more personal meaning with each of these singers when they say those words. And in sort of the Western classical tradition, we have a bit of a detachment from the meaning of the words based on the fact that sometimes they're not in languages that we actually speak. So this is something I sort of want to explore a little more, like closing that gap between the singers saying the words and um, understanding them
Hmm.
and really being able to imbue a certain level of love and passion into that performance because they're singing something that's actually meaningful to them. And I have a theory that when they do that, you get a better performance. All of this has really made me sort of reflect on what got me interested in singing in the first place. Now, I did join choir in high school and I sang through various classics. Um, but where I really thrived and where I really enjoyed singing was when I directed an a cappella group in college. And we did a lot of arrangements actually, we did a lot of African and African American music. And I was their musical director, so I arranged a lot of the music. And a lot of that music by sort of classical standards is fairly straightforward. It's homophonic. Everyone's saying the same words at the same time. The the voices move in the same direction. There's no counterpoint. It's almost like background vocals for a rock song or a pop song or something like that. We loved singing that. Like it was just fun for us. And what I'm trying to find is a way to write for choirs, which is just a joy to sing. Because if you can nail writing music that the audience loves to listen to and the singers love to sing, by golly, like you just solved the formula, right? Like that's in a way all you can ask for. If you think about music as a service, if you will, or something that has utility that is meant for people to enjoy and to create memories out of and to have personal attachment to and meaning and love, then by checking off those two check boxes, then you're basically doing all that for people. And there's part of me that also thinks that if you can write music that for just for one person out there helps them grieve the loss of a family member, or for a couple out there, they can march down the aisle to when they get married and create some loving memories and things like that. If you can do that for people, then shouldn't you do that for people? There are a lot of people writing music just for themselves out there or just to further the art, and I applaud that. I think it's wonderful. But if you're somebody who can actually just help out people through doing what they love, writing music, why not do that in a way? Like the way that I look at it is there's this Japanese concept called ikigai. And ikigai means your purpose in life. And my favorite way of talking about this is ikigai is the center of a Venn diagram with four circles. Um, Circle number one is the thing that you are good at doing. Circle number two is the thing that you enjoy doing. Circle number three is the thing that you can actually profit off of doing. And circle number four is the thing that contributes to humanity in a positive sort of way. And if what you do lands in the center of all four of those, you've just discovered your ikigai, your purpose in life. And that's my focus right now, writing music that sits squarely in the middle of that Venn diagram.
How would you say writing for opera is different than writing for a film or a video game?
There are sort of like, I guess, sort of mundane technical differences between the two. I mean, on one hand, film is a fixed medium. There's a scene, it starts at a set time, it ends at a set time, and that never changes. And so the music that you write needs to start at a certain point, move around the dialogue or the action of the scene in a certain way, and then fade out, when it's appropriate. Video games are nonlinear, so you never quite know what a player is doing. So you can't really plan for all of those situations. What I tend to get asked to do for video games is just write basically background music. I mean, it's almost like a commission in a way. They'll say, we just need 5 minutes of music that sounds sort of like ancient Babylonia or something like that. Right? And you say, okay, all right, well, all right, here. Trot out do a little research, find this ancient instrument. Oh, okay, the gishguri. Okay, that works. Let's use that, and then record something with that and then write a piece around it. And, you create this thing. But it doesn't need to attach itself to any sort of action that happens on screen or anything like that. And so there's actually a lot of creative freedom in writing for video games. The formal aspects of the music are kind of left up to me. As long as it's 5 minutes and it doesn't do anything outrageous, it works for the game, then sure. A lot of times, actually, what I get asked to write is like a theme piece or something like that for the opening menu of a game. And I would take that job over writing a song for the closing credits of a film any day of the week. Because if you watch a movie, you'll hear that song in the credits once, maybe twice if you see the movie. If they play it on the radio, you hear it more, but your exposure to it is limited. If you write for a game, especially a game like Civilization, every time the player boots up the game, they hear your music. And you know what they say about music. The more you hear a piece of music, the more you like it. And so that, I think, was the key for me in terms of having a lot of success getting my choral music out there. Like my first big choral piece that I wrote was Baba Yetu. Actually, one of the very first, it might have been the very first choral piece I ever wrote, Baba Yetu. Now that I think of it, I think that was the first time I actually wrote a choral piece. But the fact that every time you booted up Civilization 4, you heard this piece of music, I mean, it really just cemented it into people's brains. And that led to a lot of opportunities for me.
So what is it like to have the spotlight on you? You're writing your first opera, and it's being done by the Washington National Opera. Is that really stressful or difficult?
Yeah, it was really hard. But I will tell you why it was hard. It was because this particular opera brief comes loaded with a lot of expectation and a lot of opinion. And, even the moment it was announced, like Puccini scholars reached out to me and said, oh, what are you going to do? Because there's no other commission where you will have 100 years of people's opinions on what to write before you even start writing it, right? And so I think like the first 6 or 7 weeks was just me trying to find my voice within all of this. Because, the question is, do you write in Puccini's voice or do you write Christopher Tin's voice, right? Things like that. And how do you use Puccini material and still be Christopher Tin? And ultimately, through a lot of soul searching and whatnot, I came to the conclusion that most people really do not want to hear second-rate Puccini, but they might enjoy first-rate Christopher Tin. So we're just gonna do what I'm used to doing. Use my usual bag of tricks, my usual toolkit, and not Puccini's bag of tricks or toolkit, and just be me. My predecessors, um, they went down various paths on how to treat this material with mixed success. Alfano himself was very true. He was actually very true to Puccini's sketches, but the problem is, um, in the version that we know, which is sort of the cut down Alfano ending, which has almost exclusively Puccini material, he didn't take any of those sketches and develop them into anything more than just a fragment of a sketch. And so, like, the way the Alfano ending starts, which is those three big chords, Principessa de Morte, that whole passage that's actually written by Puccini. He sort of filled out the entire orchestration for that whole passage, and that was a very complete thing that he left for us. And I actually used the opening of that. Alfano, he just used that, but didn't actually turn it into a piece based on that motif. He just used it once and then moved on to the next Puccini sketch, moved on to the next Puccini sketch, then moved on to the next Puccini sketch. And so it's a little disjointed. And he has little bar transitions where we go from one key to the other key and things like that. And he actually wrote some pretty nice motifs too. In his ending, there's this dun da da dun da 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 dun da 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 da. Nice tune. I like that. That was Alfano's, not Puccini's. But the biggest problem is it does not gel together in any sort of way. There's no structural cohesion to it and no development of melodic ideas. It's one after the other, incomplete idea after incomplete idea, just thrown together. And that's why, personally, I find it musically unsatisfying. But if you listen to the original Alfano, before Toscanini cut out all of the Alfano bits, it actually sits together really neatly. It's a cool ending. I like it. It still doesn't sound anything like Puccini. In fact, it sounds even less like Puccini, but it's still pretty cool.
So did you keep the happy ending or did you change that?
This is a fairy tale. Fairy tales have certain ways of ending. Otherwise, they're not worth telling as fairy tales. So the Berio ending, for example, it's actually really interesting. Like the Calaf and Turandot, they sort of they're standing apart on separate sides of the stage. They have to walk off together into the distance, and we sort of don't know whether they're going to make it as a couple. It's sort of ambiguous. I mean, it's actually really dramatically compelling. It's very sort of real in a way. I think it would make an Oscar-winning feature film, right? I mean, it's very, you like, it's true to life in a lot of ways. But the thing is, none of this is supposed to be true to life. None of it. This is a fairy tale. And especially as the last opera in the grand Italian opera tradition, it needs to stay a fairy tale. Let's give this tradition the send-off it deserves, which in my mind is a big choral reprise of the most famous opera aria in the entire canon. And thus you go off, galloping into the sunset.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So some people think that there was no good way to end this opera, and Puccini didn't know how to end it. How do you think your ending went?
I mean, I think the problem was the plot in a way. I mean, he had no idea how to finish it, which is why I think what Susan came up with is pretty ingenious. I'm hoping we've closed the book on this whole, Turandot ending extravaganza. I'm sure it's not going to be the case. I'm, of course, a little invested in this, but I think we did a good job of solving this riddle. And I think it's believable now. And I think the problem Puccini had was love was looked at very differently in his era, and it was pretty common for a woman to inherently be on a lower level of authority than a man. And so, this whole, oh, kiss her and now she'll fall in love with you thing, maybe it made more sense to audiences back then. But what we've sort of understood as a culture now is that love is more reciprocal and it's more of a balanced thing. In order for love to be healthy, it needs to be sort of on equal footing, right? And that's why we have these back-to-back moments of vulnerability between the two characters. Turandot revealing that she was the one who was raped, and Kaloth putting his life in her hands. These are two lovers who have finally signaled to each other, look, this love is real. I'm revealing the deepest and darkest things about me. And, from what I know about women, that flies a lot better than just randomly grabbing them and kissing them. It's kind of a trope that's aged poorly, I would say. And I think that, I would not have tackled this ending if I were a younger man, not, married with a kid and having experienced love and understanding, what makes a happy marriage personally. I was able to sort of tap into sort of what makes my own marriage work, this understanding and mutual respect. These are possibly reasons why crafting a love story in this third act was difficult 100 years ago. It was a different sort of understanding of love. And maybe that's the issue at play here. Maybe our understanding of love has changed while the opera stayed locked in 1924. So we've brought love back into the picture in a 2024 sort of way for this one.
So thank you so much, Christopher, for coming and speaking to us today about the brand new ending to Turandot that we're going to see in Washington. It's being performed by the Washington National Opera, May 11th through 25th, with director Francesca Zambello, the librettist Susan Soon He Stanton, and you, Christopher Tin, composer who has rewritten this wonderful new ending, and we cannot wait to see it.
Yeah, thank you.
Ciao, thank you.
See you. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed our show. Please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel or audio podcast feed on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback of any kind, please let us know by emailing us at comments@indieopera.com. This episode of the Indie Opera Podcast was recorded on Riverside FM with co-hosts Walker Lewis and Peter Zepp, with our special guest, Christopher Tin. Our show is created with the support of Brooke Larimer, our business and operations manager, and Rosha Kriyan, our theme song creator. This episode was edited by Peter Zepp. Thank you for watching.